Thank you for joining us for this episode. Today, we're joined by Dr. Jackie Garlich, and we're going to be speaking about myths around IPL, specifically about I won't get an ROI out of this purchase on the OI show. Before we get started with Dr. Garlich, I wanted to give a special thanks to Luminous for their support of this podcast. Luminous is the inventor of IPL, and they've presented the first and only IPL that is FDA approved for the management of dry eye disease due to MGD. Introducing OptiLight, a bright solution for dry eyes. Elevate dry eye management with Luminous's patented optimal pulse technology, or OPT. Get the safe, precise, comfortable, and effective therapy your patients need to manage dry eye disease with OptiLight. And now to the show. Thanks again for joining us for this episode. We are pleased to have back from episode 29, I believe it was, Jackie Garlich. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you doing?
So good. It's good to hang out with you again. Jackie, you've got some cool things going on in the world of social media, in the world of teaching doctors. I've heard you lecture, so many things. And then you've got this little practice that is just blowing up and doing well. Give us the rundown of how you spend your week.
Yeah, the weeks are busy, but I do, as you said, I have a private practice. I bought this practice in January of 2020 and have slowly made a transition in this practice to, it was very much a primary care practice, and there's still a huge portion that is primary care, but I've built out a dry eye specialty area of the practice. So that has been growing, and it is very fun to do. I love my days where I'm doing all dry eye patients. It's my favorite day of the week. And yeah, so that's what's happening. Lots of busy things. And then I have my, social media. I have Glance by Eyes on Eye Care. So I write the formerly known as 2020 Glance, but it was acquired by Eyes on Eye Care at the beginning of this year. And that has been really wonderful. So all good things.
That is awesome. And so Glance is this quick little this quick little thing that you send out to doctors, and it tells them the glance of what's happening, right? Can you give me a better explanation? That's how I see it. It's fantastic.
That's right. You are correct. I started writing this little email that I would send out Monday mornings at 5 a.m. with just a rundown on clinically relevant optometry news. And so I include only things that I think are relevant to the practicing clinician. So new FDA approvals, promising new research, and it's a less than 5-minute read. And so that has been great. I've been doing that hilariously. I don't know if that's really the word, but since 2016, it's been a long time I've been doing it. And then in January of this year, 2020 Glance was acquired by Eyes on Eye Care, which is a phenomenal team to work with. I know you have worked with them. And so we sort of rebranded to call it just Glance. And there is now an entire news site that is all glancified, as we call it. So we take news stories and sort of dry press releases, and we break them down and rewrite them to a more easy to digest sort of news article that is a little more enjoyable to read, but still a great way to stay up to date.
I think it's awesome. I wasn't meaning your little practice. I was meaning you are spending a lot of time doing a lot of things, and this practice in 2020 took off, and then you've just blown it out of the water in the dry eye space. You have lectured on a lot of things in dry eye, and one of the things I've heard you in the space of is intense pulse light. Having just bought a practice in 2020, many people would probably wait a while to buy something like an IPL instrument. Tell me a little bit about the business decision that you went through, or were you just flowing in cash and you were just like, hey, I just want to buy all the toys that are out there. Like, tell me about that concept of like going through and the business decision of buying an IPL.
When I bought this practice, it was, great for this couple of months, and then COVID hit. So this was like a really terrifying thing for a new practice owner, because you have zero cash flow coming in and you have zero reserves. Like, I just bought this thing. Like, so that there was like a fun, like panic, kind of moment for a while, which actually in hindsight turned out to be a really good business lesson, and like a here, just like push me right into the deep end of business ownership on what you can spend and what you can't spend and what you need and what you don't need. But as things turned around, COVID sort of was subsiding. My plan was still the same, to really grow out the dry eye specialty practice part of my practice. And I ended up purchasing an IPL in 2021. And I had made a few purchases before this to make a slow build up into my like big purchase of IPL, which I was like, I always know I need an IPL, but it's a big purchase. I don't know if I can afford this. Like, are my patients going to want to pay for it? Are their patients there for it? And sometimes I think you just have to, in your gut that you do need this extra piece of equipment to really better treat your patients with inflamed lids, and you just buy it. I just bought it. So I did the math in my head, like, how many patients do I need to see for IPL a month to make my monthly payment? And so, for me, if we want to talk numbers, my monthly payment is like maybe $1,400 a month, I think, for the IPL. And I thought, okay, if I charged, the going rate is around $400 a session, how many of these patients do I need to see a month to make that monthly payment and, to not feel like I'm losing money? And once I sort of figured that out, I had that in my head, but it turns out there's way more patients than that are needing IPL during the month. So I think breaking it down for me, what number I would, before I really bought it, I thought, how many of these patients that I'm seeing need IPL? Like, how many times would I talk about this? So I had an idea, like, do I really need to sign up one person, one package a month? Well, do I have one person a month that would buy 4 sessions from me? And once I figured that out, I had a spreadsheet of like people I wrote down, this person would do it, that person would do it. It really made the decision a lot less risky for me, because I knew the patients were actually there. And so although the actual number, like price, purchase price of the IPL is really sort of like a scary number. Once you break it down and really think about your practice, just take a good look at your patient base. How many times, I do this with everything before I buy anything, how many times do I wish I had X in my day? And if I find I'm missing it a lot, then I know that the device will pay itself off.
Yeah. Well, as an innovator, you have that question often, and you hear about something and wish you had it. And then there's some people who are just like, they're not super innovative. And so they may not even be thinking about that other thing, because they're just using the technology they have. But that's the beauty about going and learning about different treatments out there. So I have to ask, there's quite a few IPLs that are on the market right now today. There's kind of the more expensive one, which would probably be OptiLite, and then there's quite a few that are more budget. Was it kind of like, okay, I want to buy the budget one, and what was the deciding factor? You can tell us which one you have if you want to. How
Yeah.
did you make that decision?
So I had been talking about buying an IPL a lot with colleagues, and one person that I talked a lot about this was with Art Epstein. And so he was really helpful to me in several email exchanges of like, why this technology was better than this technology. And he was very much into the mechanics behind the IPL, which, to be honest, is a very, in my opinion, high level sort of way to think about it. And I think it's confusing for most people. It's kind of confusing for me still, but he was really helpful to walk me through some of that stuff that I was not totally sure. Like, why is there a difference in price point between these two things? And so I ended up buying the OptiLite. And after I used my colleagues a lot to help me figure out which one I should buy. So I had several colleagues who really liked the M22 product, and I trust them. I think that's what it is, right? You trust them. You can see that there's clinical trials behind this particular device. That was pushing me. They had the FDA approval. That made me feel more comfortable. I think, for me, my patient base is well educated, and they ask me a lot of questions like, well, is this FDA approved? So I thought, I think this might be something that I really want to lean on and say, this got FDA approval. We are using this device for that. We're not using something off label. And for some of my patients, they, want to know these sort of deeper questions. And so that's kind of how I
Yeah.
did it. I used my colleagues a lot. I looked at the clinical trials and just sort of signed the paperwork.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, not just signed it. You did a lot of research ahead of time. So we did something similar. At the time, I had 2 residents, and what we did is we just went through all of the research. We looked at all the different papers, and then we started to note that all of them were using Luminus's technology with the M22. And it was like, there was tons of them, most of them. There was a couple that used different devices, but this protocol was consistent. And, Luminous invented IPL. And then it came down to this FDA approval, right? At the time, we didn't have a really clear knowledge in our state of whether IPL was something we could or couldn't do. It wasn't specifically put in our state licensure. That has changed, but and so it was also along those lines of, well, I'm going to get an FDA approved device as well. We went with the OptiLite, but it seemed as if, you're getting what you pay for in that, right? You were getting an FDA approval. You were getting something that's been clinically proven over time. So you went into this with a monthly payment, and kind of a knowledge around that. Um, so this is a financial question. Are you still doing a monthly payment, or have you paid your machine off now that you're 2 years down the road, or how have you worked through that?
So I have kept my monthly payment as it is, but I did pay off the device in about 8 months. So meaning the amount of money that generated from having the IPL was enough to pay it off had I chosen to actually pay it off that way. I am in the financial district in Boston, and it took a pretty long time, I think, for my practice to kind of get back to where it was pre-COVID. People are working from home a lot more, and the city was a lot quieter than what it normally was. And so I think there was a longer lull for me to pick back up than like the suburbs. They certainly were booming, I think, in COVID because people were sort of out at their homes. So if in my experience, this took me about 8 months to pay that off. But I have heard, and you and I have spoken about this, people are much faster at that. So I think I was maybe one of the slower ones that it took to pay that off. But
Well, depending on where you're at. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, if you think about it from the perspective of, if you divide the total purchase price divided by what you're going to be charging for 4 or 5 treatments, or even a single treatment, and then figure out how many you need to do. My usual recommendation in all of the practice management that I do when I consult with practices and so forth is at least a year. Like, if you need to be able to say that this machine is going to be paid for in a year. There are obvious exceptions with things like autorefractors and tonometers where they don't necessarily generate revenue. And you amortize that maybe a little bit longer, but with regards to treatments like this, right, it's a year or less. In our case, we did it in 4 months, a little bit less than 4 months, and we bought it a little later than you. So you bought it in some earlier COVID years than we did. We bought it at the end of 21 and kind of rolled it out. And that really kind of got things flowing pretty well for us. So the return on investment seems to have worked out for you from the money perspective. What about clinical outcomes? Are they where you expected them to be? Are patients getting, sold a bill of goods by, an amazing doctor, or are the outcomes what you expected and patients will recommend it to others?
So I think one kind of comment on the return of investment. One thing that I hear a lot from colleagues or and I think this is sort of a wrong approach to that, is like, you will hear colleagues talk about IPL saying like, oh my gosh, this thing will bring you in all this cash, get an IPL, the cash will just flow right in. And I don't think that's an accurate thing to say to someone who's considering buying the IPL. I think that that is true if the clinician really believes that the technology works. Because if you have hesitation on what that IPL is actually going to be doing, you will not be recommending this as much to your patients. And then you will have this very expensive piece of equipment that just sits in the corner of your room, and you'll be disgruntled that you actually made that purchase. So
Good point.
I think it does, it for sure, it definitely brings in a lot of cash, but I have seen now the results from IPL, and I have a strong belief on how well this will work with patients. So I'm very comfortable I don't think about the price when I'm recommending that to a patient. This is what you need. And, certainly we talk about that when I'm recommending that to a patient, but I know, one, before I had the device, just clinical trial wise and talking with my colleagues, that the technology works. But that is one point that I think is like, I wouldn't say that way to a person who wants to buy it. I would say get comfortable with the research that's actually out there so that you actually believe it works before you make the purchase. And then it will, like, you'll believe
Yeah.
it because it will work really well for you. But,
Yeah.
there is some, I think like, oh, this device is going to just the money is just going to flow in with this device. And it does not do that if you are not actually a believer that
No, you bring up a really good point with that. So thank you for saying that. I saw that in the world when I worked a lot with Tear Science, and we had brought in LipiFlow. We paid $100,000 for LipiFlow, and we brought it into our office. Now it's like $20,000, but we bought it at 100, right? And at the time, I was billing, over $2,000 for this particular service, and boom, we got a return on our investment. Our patients, got the outcome that they were looking for, and I was committed to it. But all the while, in working with reps and helping to coach them and them sharing with me what was happening, is doctors were hearing about the financial outcomes. They weren't, digging into the research and figuring out how it was going to work for their patients. And like you said, they just bought this thing because they thought it was going to make them a lot of money, and they didn't invest the time or the knowledge in how to figure out how to make it work for patients. And that's, it doesn't matter what you buy. It ain't going to just generate money for you. You've got to be putting in the time, effort, research to figure out who are the patients that are going to benefit from it. And what to expect. There's going to be times. I have a couple patients who we've done IPL on, and it hasn't given them what they wanted, right? Our outcomes are good, but it didn't meet their high expectations. So setting proper expectations. I find that sometimes doctors are just reliant on what patients tell them. And that's not a good thing when you first start a treatment in your office, especially because you're new at it, right? You may not be as good in those first couple of patients.
Yeah.
But after you get better at it, particularly with IPL, figure out the settings and how you do it. We have way better outcomes than we did in our first month now. I'm sure you do too.
Same.
So
Absolutely.
you can't just rely on that first experience of the first month. Otherwise, you'll be really disappointed. It'll sit in the corner and you'll be bitter about it from a financial perspective. That's a great perspective.
I think it really helps to have a crew of people, so to speak, that use IPL. I mean, I looked to people that had been using it off label for years, and so like, how are you doing this? What are you doing for that? And how are you doing that? I think if you're on your own, it's a whole lot harder to like improve and say like, what should my energy be when I'm treating this or that? So I think it's very helpful to find people that do use IPL and are very experienced in it and reach out to them, because that really is how you get better. It is not an instant, I'm good at it. It does take a little bit.
Absolutely. Okay, so you bought the machine, you bought the most expensive one. You were a relatively early adopter, so you probably didn't get any of these big show deals or anything that they have going on nowadays. You figured out, what is it going to take? I'm going to need to sell one patient or do 3 or 4 treatments a month. You surpassed that. You got a return on investment in 8 months, in one of the slowest times in eye care over the last 100 years. So what do you think? Is this myth of my patients won't pay, I won't get an ROI, is that debunked? I think so.
That myth for me is totally debunked. But I
Mhm.
see how it's out there. It's an expensive piece of equipment. I think that the hesitation or that myth stems from the doctor's impression of the cost of like their own hesitation on recommending a treatment that's expensive and out of pocket. And I think you will get a lot better at your flow on how you explain that to a patient. But if you once you start, once I discovered, once I started talking about this, people are like, oh yeah, yeah, I do Botox this much. I do these facials like twice a week. People spend a lot of money on aesthetics. It is a huge industry, and you are not going to get this IPL to treat people simply for aesthetics. You are getting it for for a dry eye treatment,
Mhm.
but it has these lovely side effects. And patients are like, oh, this is, wait a minute, this IPL is this much and your tear care is this much. Okay, IPL is 3 or whatever, 4 times the amount. I'll do that because that has a skin benefit with it as opposed to a tear care. And I'm like, okay, you guys are funny. But like people will spend money on aesthetics and you know, with the goal of better looking skin. It certainly is out there, but I think all of the hang up on that is literally from the doctor's perspective. I was this doctor. I was like very nervous about recommending an out of pocket procedure until I saw the results of this. I was like this with tear care when I brought that in first. That was, you know, now it's kind of like, oh, that's not even that expensive compared to what I asked for IPL. But with tear care, I was like, oh God, it's out of pocket. Yeah, it's this much. Yeah. Oh my God, my tone and my presentation of all of it was awful. And that was all my hang up. And then once people were like, oh my God, that worked so good. I'm like, oh, I know. Like once you get confidence in the device, it's so much easier to recommend it. And sort of I think less about the price. I say, this is what it is. If you can't afford it, that's totally fine. My job is to not tell you what you can afford.
Yeah.
It is to give you the options, what I would recommend. If that doesn't work, we try that, you know?
Yeah. We were just having this conversation yesterday in the office with my resident is, people put value on different things, right? And they may value an automobile and have the nicest automobile and not want to pay for a medical procedure and vice versa, right? There's people that, drive crankety old cars and they've got $5 million in the bank because it's not valuable to them. It's just we're there to present the options and educate them of why this is what we feel is the best for them or what they need. And if you don't do IPL in your practice, right, find somebody who does. And if you see telangiectasia and you see redness around the eyes and dryness, that's a great patient to send out for IPL. They'll thank you. The doctor you refer to will thank you. And it just brings about this betterment for patient care because it's all about the value, right? And as more and more people see it, and as more people in your office see the benefit, they're helpful in that educational process. Awesome. Any closing remarks here, Jackie?
My closing remark would be I would encourage everyone to not judge what you think a patient will pay for a particular treatment. So as you're saying, someone may spend a lot of money on their, I don't know. I'm just giving an example. Like if someone will come in with like really cheap, broken kind of looking glasses, and you think, oh, maybe this person doesn't have a ton of money to spend. You have no idea what people will be willing to spend
Mhm.
or what their financial status is. And so I would just encourage, I would encourage clinicians to not bring up something like if they're worried about bringing up something about the price, to not judge that and just say, I'm treating everybody the same. This is what I see in you clinically. Here's what I would recommend. And to not sort of get a look at someone and think, oh, they wouldn't be able to afford that. So
Yeah.
that's my closing remark.
Yeah. Awesome. I think we've debunked the myth that I won't get an ROI on this, but I think the key thing that you said that I really is you're right. You won't get an ROI if you're doing it for the ROI. But if
Mhm.
you bring it in because it's going to benefit patients, you've learned about it ahead of time. And I know Optilight does this. I'm sure other companies have something, but how, what is that background in the clinical science? Do they have a good clinical implementation team that can help teach you and so forth? And if you dig into that and put your time and your effort in, as much as you're willing to put your money in, you're going to have an incredible outcome. Yeah, thank you for your perspective. What a wonderful conversation. And thank you for joining us for this episode of OI Show. Make sure to like and subscribe and stay tuned next time for incredible guests like our friend Jackie Garlich.
Thanks, Dave.